Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another installment of Basic Economic Concepts. This is Chapter 2, Part 3, and I am Miss Jennifer Blank. All right, so key ideas for this lesson, concepts that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about centrally planned economies, very hot topic of conversation of late in the good old US of A. All right, so socialism versus communism, we're going to talk about that. And yes, they are different. They're not the same thing, although people often use them interchangeably. Those people are ignorant would be a polite way to put it. I can think of other words for it, but it's not appropriate for a video lesson. There are two types of communist economies that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the advantages of centrally planned economies and the disadvantages. So here we go. All right, so what exactly are centrally planned economies? Well, they are first and foremost government-owned and operated. All right, government controls the factors of production, and government answers the three key questions for the society. Specifically, a central bureaucracy determines those answers. So those of you who took government should know what a bureaucracy is. If you don't, I have a video lesson about that thing, so you can go find it. Their centrally planned economies are the same thing as command economies. You might see those used interchangeably, centrally planned or command, but they are the same thing. So let's look at socialism versus communism. We're going to start with socialism. It is not one single economic system, first of all. Again, we like to generalize things that we don't understand. There are several versions of socialism floating about in the world today. But there are some fundamental commonalities that exist. First, wealth should be evenly distributed within a society. Now, how that happens it depends on the nation that you're in. Traditional socialism says that the government decides who gets what. Market socialism says the government uses taxes to redistribute the wealth, but the factors of production are owned by individuals and private business. Typically, in those environments, you have a very, very high tax rate, which the government then decides what to do with it. Now, in communism, the government controls everything. They control everything. There are no individuals. I mean, there are, but they don't matter. Private business, non-existent. Government controls everything. This includes the factors of production and all the decision-making. This was an outgrowth of Marxism, but it should be noted that communism and Marxism are not the same thing. Everybody likes to say that, well, not everybody, but a lot of people like to say they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. Marxism is a political theory that has never actually been enacted anywhere on the planet Earth. It's just on paper right now. Communism is what we've done to try to achieve Marxism in the world. So what is that? Well, decisions should be made by the proletariat or the working class. All right, the working class or proletariat should control factors of production. There is no private property, and every single thing is publicly owned. To date, the only way that this is possible is through authoritarianism or totalitarianism. Basically, you have to have one guy who represents the party, kind of like Stalin in the Soviet Union, and has to become a dictator. That's really the only way we've figured out to make it work thus far. So there were two types of communist economies we're going to look at. The Soviet Union, which is no more, but fell in 1991, but the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. That spelled the death knell. But, pardon me, Soviet Union money and resources went to military and big industry. Everything was controlled by the central government. This resulted in massive shortages, and eventually the Soviet Union just went bankrupt. There was no way for them to improve their efficiency any more than they had, and there was no way for them to grow their economy or get additional resources. So we basically bankrupted them, and we, the United States of America, Ronald Reagan specifically. China, most things are controlled by the central government, not all things. Entrepreneurs are given some economic freedom in an effort to stimulate growth. Okay, this is an example of market communism, and this is a large part of the reason why China has not collapsed yet. However, China's in for some trouble. Their growth currently is unsustainable, and we're starting to see that now where the growth is starting to taper off a little bit, but the way that they are growing is simply not sustainable for an economy like that. All right, so advantages of centrally planned economies. Equity, in theory. Each person receives a minimum of necessities. Now, I say in theory because for the most part, in practice, that has not worked out. There are nations like Finland, Sweden, Norway. There are nations where this is working to a certain degree. But if you take nations like the Soviet Union, if you look at China, not every person is receiving a minimum of necessities. So in theory, equity is a key advantage because everyone should have the minimum. Some places this is working, some places it isn't. Security. Jobs will always be there because the government makes you work. And the government tells you what job to do and how long you're going to work and decides how much money you're going to make. So you're always going to have a job of some sort because the government's going to make you work. Regulation. That's a good thing to a degree. Government controls everything, so no one can get away with violating the regulations unless it's the government violating the regulations. So we have an issue here where if you look in China, the working conditions there aren't exactly good times. So regulation is supposed to be an advantage, but in certain instances, if the government doesn't it doesn't institute regulations or it does not follow its own regulations, then there's no one to stop them. There's no one to check them because the government controls everything. And there is absolutely no competition. All right, there's nobody to check you in that way, somebody to make this product better or make a better product because the government is the one in control of everything. They're the only one making products. Disadvantages. Economic efficiency. It's not efficient. It's not efficient at all. There is no economic freedom or very little. Economic growth is artificial and unsustainable in most cases. There is economic equity, but not really. This is a disadvantage. People in government get greedy. They take from the rest of society. That's what happened in the Soviet Union. It's one of the key reasons why they collapsed. Same thing is happening in China right now. And eventually, there's simply not enough wealth left to redistribute, and the economy collapses. All right, so these are some advantages and disadvantages of centrally planned economies. That is it for part 3, and I will see you in part 4.